Hey everyone, it's Samuel, and welcome to Plot Hooks, the podcast where we explore the arts of narrative and collaborative storytelling in the world's premier RPG, Dungeons & Dragons. Today in the Prime Material, the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer. In the Wilds, the Modrons. And in the Tavern, what would you do if you temporarily lost your powers? Hey everyone! I hope everybody out there is having a great day. Once again, it's just me on the podcast as we continue to try to create content through the restrictions of COVID-19. But I'm pretty excited about the episode we have for you today, the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer. This is one of the subclasses which you can find on the Unearthed Arcana, and we'll get into everything here in just a little bit. But first, a couple of announcements to get out of the way. Remember to follow us on all of our social media. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Subscribe to us on YouTube, if that would be your favorite way of listening to the podcast. And wherever you listen to the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you could give us a good rating. It would really help spread the word about the show to other people. Finally, it would be awesome of you if you could support us on Patreon. And we have a new patron to shout out, Allison. Thanks very much for becoming a valued supporter. She gets access to all of the awesome perks up there for our patrons, including all the homebrew information for a setting of Carrick that have been released. Coming up next in a couple of weeks is going to be the race, which is exclusive to Carrick. I've been looking at some concept art for the art that we're going to be releasing along with the document, and I just can't wait to show this to everyone. But your support really is appreciated. It helps offset the cost of running the podcast, and it helps us make it even better for you each and every day. But with that out of the way, time to dive into the Prime Material. For those of you that aren't aware, Wizards of the Coast, the company that owns Dungeons & Dragons, releases content periodically on the D&D website called the Unearthed Arcana. The Unearthed Arcana is material that's developed by the D&D staff, but it's not official yet. It's playtest content. It's content which is put out to the community for us to play with and tinker with and enjoy in our games, and then to give them feedback, at which point it may or may not end up in an official D&D product. Examples of content like this are the ship rules, which were released in Unearthed Arcana in November of 2018, and that was modified and turned into the material that was released in May of last year in Ghosts of Saltmarsh. Another example is the Artificer class, which had multiple releases in the Unearthed Arcana before getting its final form in November of last year in Eberron Rising from the Last War. Well, over the last year or so, a lot of the Unearthed Arcana that they've been releasing has been new subclasses. And I love a lot of these. I even play one of them, the Onomancy Wizard. And we're going to do a series on these subclasses. Not so much about the potential power level or the balance or anything like that. There's lots of people who are better qualified than me to discuss the mechanical elements. But we want to talk about the story potential. What kind of narratives can we tell with these new subclasses which perhaps we couldn't before? What new avenues do they open up for us? Or new aspects which maybe we hadn't quite explored, which now they kind of bring to the forefront? So we're going to talk about these subclasses in this new series, and today we're going to talk about a new Sorcerer subclass, the Clockwork Soul. First, as a reminder, the Sorcerer class in Dungeons & Dragons is a spellcaster that has innate magical abilities. Whereas a wizard gets their magic from their study and their intelligence, and they literally learn how to bend reality to their will, and classes like clerics and paladins are gifted their magic from their deity and from their belief. Warlocks get their magic gifted to them from a patron via a deal that they've made with them. Sorcerers are different because their magic is something that is innate to themselves. Some event or something else in the past has given them magical abilities personally. There's no belief required, no years of study, no solemn oath like a paladin, no pact like a warlock. Just something has happened that gave the sorcerer magic innate to themselves. And this can come from a variety of sources, whether it be their bloodline, as it is with the Draconic bloodline subclass. It could be because they encountered something like an untamed source of wild magic, and any number of different options. But each sorcerer subclass is themed around what exactly the source was that gave the sorcerer their power. The different subclasses are actually called sorceress origins. And for the Clockwork Soul subclass, this source, that origin, is the pure order of Mechanus. Mechanus, or to give it its full name, the Clockwork Nirvana of Mechanus, is the outer plane that's aligned with lawful neutral. It's not good, it's not evil, it's just pure order. It's pure law. And that order is manifested in an infinite realm of massive cogs and gears, all of which are interconnected and turning together, creating some sort of interaction that's so complex that not even the gods can deduce what the purpose of it all is. And everything here on this plane is equal. Equal parts of light and dark, equal parts of hot and cold. And in fact, one of the optional rules that the Dungeon Master's Guide suggests when you're traveling to this plane is that you always use the average damage result for spells and attacks. So if something would deal 1d4 plus 2, well, instead of rolling a d4 plus 2, you just take the average, which is 4, 2 plus 2. And that's just because everything is ordered. Everything is just based on pure law, pure order. There's an entity that dwells here in Mechanus that's named Primus. It is the creator of the clockwork entities known as the modrons, which we'll be covering in the Wild segment today. It's difficult to know exactly what Primus is, canonically. It's referred to in 5th edition as, quote, a god-like being, end quote, and, quote, the leader of the modrons, end quote. The Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition developers seem to shy away from referring to it as a god. There's some concrete lore in other editions, but in 5th edition, the information is very ambiguous. And I personally like this, because to me, this makes Primus unique, rather than being just another deity among the multiplicity of the ones which inhabit the Dungeons & Dragons multiverse. It's almost like he's the multiverse's manifestation of pure order, and I like that about it. It's a really interesting entity. Now, there's a lot more specifics and really cool things about Mechanus and Primus that we could discuss. But for now, as far as the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer is concerned, this just gives us some great background as to where this innate power that the sorcerer has is coming from. This Clockwork Soul Sorcerer has been imbued with power from this plane somehow, or maybe even by Primus himself. Somehow, the pure law, the pure order of Mechanus has gifted this person with the ability to become a sorcerer. And there's lots of great storytelling opportunities here. How did this happen to your character? Primus isn't an entity which reaches out from its realm to bless mortals very much. So it's unlikely that you just got imbued with this power by it witnessing your actions and then just choosing to give you this sorceress power. But maybe you interacted somehow with an artifact of his. Perhaps you interacted somehow with a portal that transported you to Mechanus. and then you spent some time there and its order just seeped into your very soul? Did something come into your possession that contained a portion of the pure law from Mechanus? Perhaps a stray modron befriended you, and interaction with it somehow imparted its order into your spirit? Perhaps you got captured and studied by some modrons during the Great Modron March, which we'll discuss later in the wilds. Or what if you're not aware of why you have this power? What does that mean for your character? There's a lot of great narrative opportunities with this subclass, with this source of where your sorceress abilities come from. And interestingly, the fact that the pure order of Mechanus is the source of your power is a visible thing too. It's not something where you just can't tell, like a wizard subclass, where you can't easily tell what arcane tradition the wizard is. Sure, you get some different spells, but there's not a visual change. But the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer actually exhibits visible effects of the pure order of Mechanus whenever they cast a spell. There's actually a D6 table in the subclass which gives you options and ideas for this. There's the fact that large spectral cogwheels can appear hovering behind you. The hands of a clock can appear in your eyes. Your skin can glow with a golden metallic-like sheen. Your features could become unnaturally angular, like geometric objects. It could be that the spellcasting focus that you use takes the form of a miniature spawning stone or another creation of Primus. The ringing of a clock could also be heard by you and by those affected by your magic. These are options that the subclass actually gives you of things that could happen whenever you are casting your spells, and you get to choose from those. These are powerful sensory effects, and they set your character apart at first glance from all others. When you and your party come bursting into a town to save it from the troll attack, the guards aren't going to bat much of an eye when the fighter swings his sword, or the ranger shoots his arrow, or even the wizard casting a powerful spell. Sure, they could be amazed by the combat prowess of these individuals. They're not likely to have encountered individuals as powerful as those in the party, but imagine walking into town as that Clockwork Soul Sorcerer, casting fireball at those trolls while giant ghostly cogwheels appear and begin to turn behind you. They're very powerful sensory effects which make it clear that you're different, that your power comes from something which is not of the prime material plane, and that could just bring some great storytelling opportunities. As far as the actual features of the subclass go, you get spells based on your subclass at levels 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, and they're pretty flavorful. Most of them are themed around bringing order and stopping or preventing disorder. At level 1, you get Alarm and Protection from Evil and Good. I really like Protection from Evil and Good in this place because you are a sorcerer that has their power directly from the force of pure law, pure lawful neutrality. There's no good or evil in that source. It's just order. And here you are with this spell from the very first level that would be able to protect you from things which aren't just pure ordered neutrality. At third level, you get Fine Traps and Heat Metal. Heat Metal, of course, playing into the kind of artifact central mechanical theme of Mechanus. But Fine Traps, again, just preventing disorder. You're looking for something that's amiss. At 5th level, you get Counterspell, of course, a very flavorful spell. Somebody's casting something that you don't approve of, something that isn't going to bring order. You just stop them. You just stop that disorder with your pure order. You also get Glyph of Warding, which can be used a lot in protective ways, where you're actually trying to keep something by placing this glyph here so that it cannot be messed with. At 7th level, you get Arcane Eye and Otoluk's Resilient Sphere. Otoluk's Resilient Sphere is an excellent order-based spell. You just put yourself in a ball and nothing can affect you. You're just completely safe from the chaos of the outside in the middle of a battle while you're stuck inside of your sphere. And at 9th level, you get Animate Objects and Wall of Force. Animate Objects, again, going back to the mechanical nature of Mechanus. And Wall of Force just being, again, something you could use to protect something from a force that you don't want. Protect from the chaos of battle or what have you. So all the spells that you get are just really flavorful. And not only that, but the unique Clockwork Soul abilities are even more flavorful. Again, it's all about bringing order. At level 1, you get the Restore Balance feature, which I'm just going to read straight out of the Unearthed Arcana release. It says, your connection with the plane of absolute order allows you to equalize chaotic moments. When a creature you can see within 60 feet of you is about to roll a d20 with advantage or disadvantage, you can use your reaction to prevent the roll from being affected by advantage or disadvantage. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your charisma modifier, minimum of once, and you regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. So here we have a feature where you're literally trying to bring order to something that's unordered. And again, it's not about being good or bad. It's something where you have something which is off balance in the view of the lawful neutral plane. Something's off balance. Something is either having advantage or disadvantage. It's just off of the average. It's off balance. And you get to go in and you get to make that balanced. And as a party member, you get to choose to do that to your players who are at disadvantage and make them be able to make a straight roll for an attack. And you get to take advantage away from people trying to affect you and your party mates. A really cool feature and just really flavorful where you can just tell a really interesting story. At 6th level, you get the Bulwark of Law feature. This says, again, directly out of the release, you can imbue a creature with a shimmering shield of order. As an action, you can expend 1 to 5 sorcery points to create a magical ward around yourself or another creature you can see within 30 feet of you. The ward lasts until you finish a long rest or until you use this feature again. The ward is represented by a number of d8s equal to the number of sorcery points spent to create it. When the warded creature takes damage, it can use its reaction to spend a number of those dice, roll them, and reduce the damage taken by the total of the spent dice. So it's a little bit of a clunkily worded feature, but essentially what you're doing is, like it says, creating a shield of pure order. And as things hit you or hit another creature that you've placed this ward on, they get to take some of the sorcery points, which are flavored as essentially it's your own power, that you are taking this power, which is sourced directly from pure law and pure order. You take this power and you gift it to them. You gift 1 to 5 of your sorcery points to someone else, or you just imbue it onto yourself, and it becomes a resource to use to prevent the attacks of an enemy. Again, very flavorful. At 14th level, you get Trance of Order, which says you gain the ability to enter a state of clockwork consciousness as a bonus action. For the next minute, attack rolls against you can't benefit from advantage, and whenever you make an attack roll, an ability check, or a saving throw, you can treat a d20 roll of 9 or lower as a 10. Once you use this action, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest or until you expend 5 sorcery points to be able to use it again. Those of you that are familiar with rogues would recognize this mechanically as sort of like the reliable talent feature that the rogue gets. But here, as you're at 14th level, you're already pretty high up on the level chain. Here you are as this sorcerer with this pure force of law, this pure force of order, which is imbued into you, and you just go into sort of a trance, and you are able to just do things reliably, just like a rogue is. You're able to remember exactly how you make such and such a motion or such and such an attack because you've done it so many times by 14th level, and you know the exact moves that you need to get, the exact order and method of their use, and it just makes you much more reliable. A very powerful feature, and one that really demonstrates how you're just tapping directly into the pure law, the pure order of the source of your power. The final feature you get is at 18th level, called Clockwork Cavalcade. It says you summon spirits of order to restore balance around you. As an action, you summon the spirits in a 30-foot cube originating from you. The spirits look like modrons or other constructs of your choice. The spirits are intangible and invulnerable, work fast and efficiently, and create the following effects within the cube before vanishing. So this all happens within 6 seconds of using it as your action. The effects are: the spirits restore up to 100 hit points, divided as you choose among any number of creatures of your choice within the cube. Any damaged objects entirely in the cube are repaired. Every spell of 6th level or lower ends on the creatures and objects of your choice in the cube. Once you use this action, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest or until you expend 7 sorcery points to use it again. Here you're summoning spirits directly from Mechanus of pure order. And within this space that you create, you bring things back to normal. You bring things back to order. Broken stuff is repaired. People are healed and brought back to their normal state. Spells which are affecting you or other objects that are not too powerful to where these spirits cannot affect them just end. Everything goes back to a normal, orderly state. And all these features are just extraordinarily flavorful. I just love how flavorful this subclass is, because it really makes an amazing amount of story potential. And so if you decide to play this class, there's a few different questions that I would ask yourself. What feelings do you have about this power? It's something which is sourced within yourself, of course. It's something that you have because you interacted in some way with this force of pure law, but you are bringing this force of law to bear in the prime material, especially if you aren't a player character that is lawful aligned. How do you feel about bringing order? How do you feel? Do you feel like you're an instrument that is bringing order and you don't like it very much? Or is it something where you're just content to just use it as an ability and it has no effect on you? Or do you see yourself as becoming an agent destined to bring order? How do you respond to that? How do you feel about this power? You also have to ask yourself, how do you respond to disorder around you? If this power is something which affects you on a personal level and isn't just something which happens to be the source of your abilities, which of course is a very valid way of playing it too, but if you aren't that way, then how do you respond to disorder? What about relational disorder amongst your party? How do you feel when there's intra-party conflicts? What about political conflicts within a campaign with that sort of intrigue going on? What about interactions with disorderly organizations that are seeking to upset the balance of a kingdom or of a certain different organization? How do you feel about that? You also have to ask yourself if any of these effects change who you are as a person. As you're becoming more and more powerful, you're able to tap into more and more of this energy which is stored within yourself, sourced out of this plane of Mechanus. Does that change you at all? Are you becoming more lawful? Or again, is this just something which you're able to separate the source of your powers from your personality? These are all questions which you have to ask yourself as you're playing this subclass, because it is very, very flavorful, and it gives you a great opportunity to tell stories. And it's a great subclass for RP. This is a subclass where it's not just going to affect how you act in combat necessarily. This is something that could affect your character at its core. And so I think this is just a really interesting subclass. And again, we'll talk about a lot more of them. And contact us on social media or on our email and let us know which one you want to see next. But I think that'll just about wrap up the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer. What do you say we head over to Mechanus itself and take a look at some modrons in the wilds? We're out here in the wilderness, and specifically, we're out here on Mechanus talking about modrons. Modrons are creations of Primus that dwell within Mechanus and take care of the gears and cogs of the plane. And like their creator and like the plane itself, they're entities of perfect law and order. Their lives work like clockwork. They have no purpose or desire to do anything out of their designed role. They just follow the orders of their bosses and give orders to their subordinates. It's just pure, orderly hierarchy. They don't even think of themselves as individuals. There's only the whole. There's 5 different varieties of them that are listed in the Monster Manual, where you can find them on page 224. There's the monodrone, the duodrone, the tridrone, the quadrone, and the pentadrone. They're organized in a clear hierarchy, as we mentioned before, with the pentadrones at the top and descending all the way down to the lowly monodrone. And these lines are extraordinarily distinct. In fact, the intelligence levels are so defined that each variety of modron only communicates with its variety or one level up or down the chain. Any farther apart than that, and they literally cannot communicate with each other because they're simply on different wavelengths altogether. Now, modrons can change ranks. When one of them dies, that one immediately turns into a metal dust. And then one of the rank below it immediately gets transformed and promoted to take its place. And then that obviously leaves a gap in the rank below it. And then someone else from the rank below that is transformed all the way down to, if there's a monodrone missing, that gets replaced by Primus itself, who creates a bunch of them constantly there on Mechanus. Individually, they're not very strong creatures. The strongest of them being the pentadrone is only a challenge rating 2, but they're extremely interesting because of the way that they're organized. If you happen to find yourself on Mechanus or interacting with them in any sort of way, you're not just going to find just one. This is going to be a type of battle where if you do start a combat encounter with them, it's going to be a ton of them. Perhaps a leader of a pentadrone and then a few of another variety. And it's going to be a very big battlefield with a lot of modrons that you're going to have to contain with. An interesting fact about them is that all of the modrons have true sight, which is very unique among lower challenge rating monsters. But just the way that they're designed, their mechanical nature, they innately all have true sight up to 120 feet. They also can't be charmed or commanded to do things which are outside of its ordained role. It can't be told to go do something which is outside of its designation. It has to follow its instructions. No matter what the party tries, they're never going to be able to overcome the pure law which is just encased into these beings. The one thing about using them is that they are mainly encountered on Mechanus. You're not likely to come across them in any other plane. There's just no reason for them to leave the plane, except for one time every 289 years. The Monster Manual describes what's known as the Great Modron March, which happens whenever the gears of Mechanus have completed a full rotation 17 times, which is every 289 years in the rest of the multiverse. And at each of those times, Primus sends out a huge army of modrons across all of the outer planes, where they're essentially just doing a reconnaissance mission. Most of the modrons don't return. It's a very difficult task, and most of them are destroyed. But Primus just seems to send out these feelers, and the few modrons that return just gains information on everything that's going on throughout the outer planes. And that could be an interesting thing to use in your story. Perhaps something has triggered Primus to do it on the prime material plane instead of just the outer planes. And all of a sudden, there's just hundreds upon thousands of modrons which are just spilling out all over the place. And you have to go through an entire arc of trying to figure out what the heck is going on, what are these things, and how do we stop it? There's also the hook of an unexpected Great Modron March, where it hasn't been 289 years yet, and yet now all of a sudden they're coming out, and you have to figure out what's happening. And if I'm not mistaken, that's actually the basis of a 2nd edition adventure about the Great Modron March, which was released by TSR way back in the day. There's also a variant rule about them called Rogue Modrons. These are modrons which, unsurprisingly, have gone rogue. This happens whenever the unit is broken, whenever it's defective. Perhaps it's been exposed to something which has altered its makeup, a chaotic force perhaps, or maybe it's just been in an area where it's just naturally beginning to wear out, and it's become defective. And in this case, you get a modron that doesn't follow this absolute hierarchy, that doesn't obey Primus, that doesn't follow this strict law that it was created from. And I love the idea of using one of these as an NPC, as a entity that, if you're doing one of these other tricks around the Great Modron March, is actually a source of information for the party. Or perhaps it's just something that they come across and is unrelated to any other arc that you're going on, but they just come across this creature and it essentially becomes a familiar, and it just travels around with the party, and it's just this little mechanical object which follows them around. It's just really interesting to have this idea of just being followed around by this clockwork person. And you can even charm a rogue modron into doing this, because once it does become rogue, they actually lose that feature called the axiomatic mind, which is what prevents them from being told to do something contrary to their programming in the first place. So once that's gone, you could even charm them into your service for a time. They really are really interesting creatures which look great visually and just have a great flavor to them because they're tied so heavily into this very flavorful place of Mechanus. But I think that'll just about wrap up our time on Mechanus today. Let's leave the wilds and head back to the tavern to have some refreshment. Alright, back here in the friendly confines of the tavern. The plot hook today: what would you do if you temporarily lost your powers? Now, specifically, I'm referring to arcane abilities here. And this is an interesting hook for spellcasters, because all of a sudden, the abilities that they're used to using to solve all of their problems, all of a sudden they just don't work. You see this most often in games with warlocks, whenever their patron is not pleased with them and they take their gifts away for a time. With other classes, it can be a little bit harder to generate a situation like this. Sorcerers, of course, as we discussed today, have their magic inside of them, innate, due to some pre-existing event. Wizards have learned all their magic and they've copied down the arcane motifs into their spellbooks. But there are still creative ways you could do this. It could be as simple as a classic dungeon trope where you enter an area where magic just doesn't work, where there's some sort of anti-magical field. Or it could be a complex thing, like the god of the cleric or the patron of the warlock being displeased with them. Something could temporarily happen to the wizard's spellbook. Maybe the villain casts a spell on the spellbook that makes it temporarily unreadable. Perhaps if you're the sorcerer, maybe a similar event to what gave you your powers triggers again and temporarily shuts them off. It's hard to give hard and fast specifics because how this would work would be very, very specific to each PC, their particular stories, and where their abilities come from. But once the abilities are lost temporarily, it gives a really interesting story opportunity. Now, important caveat, I keep saying temporarily. I personally think that's vital. Now, this varies based on your table, and again, as we always say here at Plot Hooks, we're not trying to present hard and fast rules. We're just presenting things which can be starting points for conversations and prompting points which can lead you into your own ideas so that you can tell the best story that you can at your own table. But personally, I would only do this in a temporary sense. Because whenever this occurs, a DM is temporarily taking away some of the coolest abilities that this PC has. In fact, some of the abilities which maybe that's why the player chose to play this class in the first place. And if this is not something that's quickly resolvable, it can really hurt the player-DM dynamic. It can really hurt that relationship. It's one thing if a player character makes a choice knowing the consequences, like they've been warned not to do something by their god or their patron, but it's an entirely other matter for this to occur and be a long-standing thing out of the blue. I don't think it's something we should do unless it's resolved within a single session. But, even with that caveat, as an obstacle to overcome within a session, it's a really interesting hook, because it forces the players to think outside of the box. They have to come up with creative solutions to problems because they don't have their normal fallback options that they always have. And you can leave little breadcrumbs around which guide them to these solutions. I like using this scenario as part of a dungeon puzzle. You can have a room which has a very simple magical solution, maybe a really easy to solve riddle on the wall next to an arcane lock which tells you have to cast a spell that requires a certain element, like cast a fire spell or something into the lock in order to activate it. But whenever they try to do that, they find out that something has tried to prevent entry here by placing one of those anti-magic fields. And now they have to figure out how to disable the field and enter this door using their wits and the tools at their disposal instead of their normal magical tool set which solves every other problem for them. This scenario can also be a good prompt for a player character that has their power sourced from elsewhere, like a warlock or a cleric or a paladin. Perhaps the character hasn't been following exactly what they're supposed to do for an extended period of time, and now the entity's getting impatient. Again, it's temporary. It doesn't happen for a very long time in game, but it It can really grab their attention and maybe twist a narrative, maybe add some sense of urgency to completing the current task, or maybe it gives them some direction on what tasks they're supposed to accomplish next, or maybe even make them reconsider their relationship with the entity altogether. And all of these options lead to some great role-playing. Maybe this is something that happens while the group is accomplishing a specific task. Maybe a mob boss or a particular person that's giving them a quest wants to make sure that they're worthy of accomplishing this goal. And this person puts the party through a test where they have to accomplish something without using magical means. They don't even have to actually be taken away where they can't use them here. It's just they're now forced to think outside the box and figure out how they can pass this test without using any of their arcane abilities. And there's innumerable other ways of doing this, and of course we don't have time to go into all of them. Basically, though, what this plot hook is about is subverting those expectations. Your abilities are just supposed to work, right? Having little moments where they don't, though, for whatever reason, really subverts those expectations. It forces you to look through your character sheet at those items that you got back in session 1 when you fought those goblins a couple of years ago in your campaign, as you're trying to figure out what you can use to accomplish this task. It can give your characters and your players a great opportunity to demonstrate some ingenuity. And once they do, I think it's always really fulfilling because they get to say, "Oh yes, I figured this out." The character didn't use any specific arcane abilities. They just figured it out with their own wits. Basically, any plot hook that really alters the way that the game normally plays and really makes the players think outside the box, I really enjoy those personally as a DM. Well, I think that'll just about wrap up this week's episode of Plot Hooks. Thanks very much for joining us. Again, thanks to Allison for joining our Patreon. And thanks for listening from all of us here at the Plot Hooks team. I'm Samuel. Thanks from Matt, Mike, Steve, Dave, Zach, Becca, and podcast pupper Ellie. We'll see you all again next week for another episode of Plot Hooks.